Hello! Welcome to Psychology in a Snap. Today, in this video, you will learn the following topics. What is social psychology? What is obedience? A famous agency theory by Milgram. Further explanation on the agency theory. Evaluation on agency theory, strengths and weaknesses. Socialization of obedience. Individual differences. Two types of individual differences. Other factors, and lastly, social power of obedience. So let's get into the video. What is social psychology? Social psychology is the study of how other people influence our thoughts and behaviors. Early thinkers noticed people acting differently in groups. Now that we know the definition, let's dive into the topics. What is obedience? Obedience is following the orders from an authority figure due to imagined or real pressure. On one hand, following rules keeps society safe and organized. But on the other hand, obedience can lead to harmful consequences. Example, soldiers in a war. Milgram's agency theory. In this topic, I will talk about why Milgram studied obedience and what he found. He wanted to study obedience because he wanted to know why people would obey harmful orders. So he conducted an experiment to give instructions to participants to shock an innocent person. What Milgram found was that many people would obey orders from an authority, and they would show signs of moral strain. Examples would be anxiety and sweating. But despite this, they still obeyed the orders. And if asked, the participants would shift the responsibility to the authority, saying they were just following the orders and didn't want to harm anyone. On further explaining the agency theory, there are two psychological states, autonomous and agentic. The autonomous state is when you act based on your own free will, and you yourself are responsible for your own actions. The agentic state is when you see yourself as an agent for an authority and obey their orders even if you disagree with them. Furthermore, you would shift your responsibility to the authority. Now, let's talk about moral strain. You've already heard of it in the last couple of slides. Moral strain is when you are told to do an act which is believed to be wrong and harmful. You will experience discomfort, anxiety, sweating, nervous laughter, and shaking. Now, let's move on to the evaluation of agency theory, the strengths and weaknesses. Strengths. It is supported by Milgram's findings. 65% of the people obeyed harmful orders. It helps explain real-life events. Example, the soldiers saying they were following the orders. It explains how authority and hierarchy influence human behavior. Weaknesses. It doesn't explain individual differences, why there is a variation, like why some obey and some don't. It is reductionist. It ignores other factors such as personality, gender, culture, and past experiences. Lastly, it doesn't include situational factors like location. The next topic would be socialization of obedience. Society teaches us from young to obey teachers, parents, and police, and therefore this helps maintain safety and order. Without obedience, there would be challenges to the social order, resulting in chaos. Therefore, it is best to be obedient to maintain social order. Okay, let's talk about individual differences now for the next topic. Past experiences affect obedience. If someone was harmed by an authority, they may obey less. Examples just like Gretchen Brandt, refusing to obey in Milgram's study due to past trauma. Moreover, there are two types of individual differences, which are personality and gender. Personality. Personality refers to the stable psychological traits that influence how we behave and think. There is a linkage to obedience which only applies to some personality types. Example, authoritarian personality, which obeys without any disagreement to the authority. Gender. Gender refers to basically men and women. There are some findings in Milgram's research where women's obedience rate is identical to the men's, but their anxiety rate was much higher than men's. And a higher percentage of women were dissented. Now, let's talk about other factors. There are two subheadings under this topic, which are situational and cultural. Situational factors. In situational factors, by the social impact theory, obedience is determined by the authority's strength, proximity, and number. Obedience is higher when having a legitimate authority, the authority is close or nearby, and the number of individuals are less. Cultural factors. The cultural norms shape how people view and respond to authority. In addition, there are three types of cultural factors: individualistic, collectivistic, and cross-cultural variation. The individualistic values autonomy and personal achievements and tends to be less obedient. But the collectivistic values group harmony and tends to show a higher obedience level. And lastly, obedience isn't universal for cross-cultural variation, which means some countries have a higher obedience than others. It shows cultural background and socialization interact with the situation. Finally, let's talk about the last topic I will be covering today: social power of obedience. John French and Bertram Raven, 1959, identified 5 bases of power, which are said to motivate and influence behavior. So, the 5 bases are coercive power, reward power, legitimate power, expert power, and referent power. I will now state the definitions of each power. Coercive power is the ability to impose a punishment. Example, a teacher can issue a detention. Reward power is the ability to give a reward or incentive. Example, a parent giving pocket money to their children. Legitimate power, an official or recognized position. Example, a police officer or elected official. Expert power, a superior knowledge or expertise held by a credible influencer. Example, a college professor. Referent power, respect or admiration. Example, celebrity or charismatic leader. If an individual has a base of social power or is perceived to have it, they have potential influence over others. However, these bases of power are also determined by conditions or circumstances that follow. For example, a football referee retains legitimate power during the game, but not when the game is over. So, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on Psychology in a Snap.